Hey, folks, good evening and welcome to Phantoms Monsters Radio. Thanks for joining me. Now, I want to welcome all new members and listeners to the channel, as well as first timers in the chat. So, tonight's subject vampires. Um, I don't normally talk about vampires, but somebody made a suggestion, so I figured I'd go for it. Anyway. The most famous American vampire is that of 19-year-old Mercy Brown. She died in Exeter, Rhode Island in 1892. Now, her father, assisted by the family physician, removed her heart after she was removed from the tomb after her death 2 months later, and they took the heart and they burned it to ashes. Her community was blaming her for the deaths of many family members who had died from tuberculosis in the late 1800s. Now, like many myths and legends, vampirism is based partly on fact. A bloody disorder called porphyria, which has been with us for millennia, became prevalent among nobility and royalty in Eastern Europe. It is an inherited blood disorder that causes the body to produce less protein in the red blood cells and that carry oxygen from the lungs to the body tissue. Now, some of the symptoms include pigment changes in the skin. Thus, the skin becomes highly sensitive to sunlight, causing blistering, erosions, and ulcerations. Now, over the centuries, there have been reports and allegories of encounters with certain humans that exhibited supernatural abilities akin to the vampire legend. So I'm going to present a few of these accounts, both historical and contemporary. So let me start off with this brief, though terrifying, encounter report. On May 1st, 1932, a 32-year-old lady of the night, Lily Lindstrom, was discussing plans for the evening's May Day celebrations with her friend Minnie Jansen, a 35-year-old woman who lived in the same floor and made her living in the same way. Now, Lily was nicknamed the call girl because she was the only person in the building with a phone. Now, Lily received a call from a potential client asking if she could come over. Lily agreed, and Minnie left her at it. Now, on the 4th of May, 1932, Lily was found dead in her flat in that district of Stockholm, Sweden. Now, she was last seen alive by her friend Minnie. Now, Minnie said that Lily had to go to her apartment twice one evening. On the second occasion, around 9 o'clock p.m., Lily was totally naked beneath her coat. That was the last time that she had seen of Lily for a couple of days. And Minnie became concerned after ringing Lily's doorbell and getting no reply. She called the police, who forced their way in. Lily was found lying dead on the sofa, her clothes neatly folded on a chair nearby. Her skull had been dealt a crushing blow. What elevates this case from the tragic to the utterly bizarre, though, was the fact that somebody had been drinking her blood. Now, in the room was a blood-stained gravy ladle. Further inspection revealed that the blood had been drained from Lily's body, and the killer had used the ladle to drink it. Now, despite the authorities' best efforts, the story leaked, and the local press nicknamed the unknown killer the Atlas Vampire due to the area of the city which Lily lived. Now, 80 of Lily's customers were investigated, but no suspects were ever revealed. Many had recognized the voice on the phone from what she'd heard, but she commented that the man had seemed sober and polite. There didn't seem to be any fingerprints of anything suspicious on any items at the scene. One theory was that the killer was a police officer who had bludgeoned Lily with his truncheon and knew how to cover his tracks. Either way, Lily's final customer was never found. That's kind of an interesting story to start off with. And I do have more to tell. So stay tuned and we'll get to it.
We live in a reality of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it.
So before I go any further, I want to mention that this channel is made possible by you clicking on the subscribe and like buttons and by sharing our programming. Super chat and super thanks donations are appreciated. You can click the dollar icon located below the chat box. The Buy Me a Coffee link is also shown below. So thanks for your consideration. Now, your comments are always welcome. Tell me which accounts you find interesting in the presentation or suggestions for upcoming shows. I want to again thank our chat moderators, Bernadette, Marla, Thomas, and Mike, for their commitment to me and this channel. Now, if you're in the chat and you have a question, please use all caps, and I'll try to get to each one of them after the presentation. So, before I start with the reports, I want to give a bit more context to this vampire legend. In 1926, a woman by the name of Agnes Mergocci wrote The Vampire Romany, and it included the ways to determine if any dead man was a vampire. She listed, first of all, his household, his family, and his livestock, and possibly even the livestock of the whole village die off rapidly. Second of all, he comes back in the night and speaks with the family. He may eat what he finds in dishes and knocks things about, or he may help with the housework and cut wood. Female vampires also come back to their children. There was a Hungarian vampire which could not be kept away even by a priest in holy water. Third, the priest reads the service at the grave. If the evil which is occurring does not cease, it's a bad sign. Fourth, a hole about the size of a serpent may be found near the tombstone of the dead man. If so, it is a sign of a vampire, because vampires come out of the graves by just such holes. Fifth, even in the daytime, a white horse will not walk over the grave of a vampire, but stands still and snorts and neighs. Sixth, a gander similarly will not walk over the grave of a vampire. 7, on exhuming the corpse, if it is a vampire, it will be found to be red in the face, even for months and years after burial. But many times the face is turned downwards. And sometimes the foot's retracted or forced into the corner of a grave or a coffin. Anyway, the first account. Hello, Mr. Strickler. I read a vampire-related article on your site and thought that I'd submit my strange encounter. I was with my friends at a party. Everything was okay and boring for me because I cannot drink alcohol. I have stomach issues. Nevertheless, we had some fun, left the party early, and went to a friend's house to chill. Now, after a couple of minutes, I heard some of his friends come in to join us. Several hours passed, and I wanted to leave for home because it was getting very late. Now, some friends of his decided to take me home in the car, and before we reached the car, we saw several men out in the front of the car, many of whom looked drunk, but I wasn't expecting any kind of trouble. Now, as I walked past the car to get to the back seat, waiting for the owner to let me in, a man approached from that group and told me to get inside the house because he was needed by someone. It appeared to me the owner knew this guy because he did exactly that without opening the car or telling me anything. I just stood there for a couple seconds and decided to walk back in the house to see if he was still willing to take me home or if I should go on my own. Now, I had my driver's license suspended due to an accident a few years ago. I went into the house and said goodbye again to some friends, and while I was thinking of my journey home because the public transportation at that hour didn't run. It was about 4 a.m. Now, I live in Eastern Europe, by the way. I don't know if it is in the USA, the public transport system differs, but at the same time, a man who was outside apparently walked into the house with two more guys, and it caught my attention. He had medium brown, darkish hair, slim with loose clothes, very common looking, but that wasn't the thing that caught my attention. When he entered the house, I just got a strong feeling coming from him that I couldn't describe that well. He looked at me. He had dark brown, glassy eyes. I didn't say anything, but then he started to move around, even the two guys that went with him, and that's when I realized his movements were so unnatural and weird. It seemed like he was going backward. His arms were behind his body as he moved. The feeling I had was not fear, though you would fear the unknown like ghosts, demons, the dark, a horror movie, etc. This was a feeling I had a few times when someone died or saw something very graphic and gore related. I swear I could feel it in my brain. It was the same feeling I had when I watched someone years ago falling off the stairs with blood running from their ears. It was not fear, but it was like the brain rewiring itself somehow. Now, he looked at me intensely, which seemed at the time a very long period, and I couldn't move. I now remember opening my mouth halfway and just staring back at him, eyes wide open and fixating my vision on him, but I didn't want to connect with his eyes. Now, subconsciously, I think I told myself not to look for some reason. He never spoke a word and no one else engaged him. He went straight for the door after making these rounds inside the house, and for a second he stood on the door entrance and turned his head again to look at me. He was pale white, and in a way evoked the same feeling in me as before. He left. I tried to gather myself, trying to convince myself that there was nothing wrong. So I left my friend's house for home. I forgot about the whole thing while outside. It was freezing. I was walking in the snow, feeling sleepy and tired until I saw him again near a closed travel agency building. He was ahead of me, leaning against the glass walls. He didn't seem to notice me, but I know then that that was him. I switched sides on the sidewalk to get some distance, and with one eye looked over in his direction. He noticed me halfway and smiled. I couldn't see his face better because of the snow and the distance, but I noticed his mouth was deep red, almost bloody. I picked up the pace, worrying that he might follow, but he stood his ground. Shortly after, I was out of range and on my way home. I tend to smoke a lot. I had this irrational fear when I got home and lit up a cigarette with my window open that someone might come in. I was thinking of him specifically, though I live in an apartment on the 15th floor. Nothing happened, of course, and I went to sleep. Now, while writing this, I remember vividly the same feeling I had when I encountered this man, and I can't shake it. Somehow I get a mental image and visualize this man as I did back then, somehow not human, yet human enough not to be afraid in a way I would be with something deeply supernatural. I guess only one word came to my mind when I think of him, a sort of vampire, though strangely enough, it's not from any book of fiction or myth I know. I keep sensing him like that. I don't know why. I could tell myself that this was nothing out of the ordinary, but the experience and the feelings I went through were anything but ordinary. I must keep that in mind. I can't ignore them, and I subconsciously give them credence. This next account, the witness states, I've never been the type of girl who gets scared easily, and what's more, I never believed in the paranormal stuff and creatures like vampires, werewolves, etc., until I witnessed it with my own eyes. So, in 2012, me and my friend went on a trip to Romania. We basically explored the country because my parents were really interested in its culture. After we visited Bistrița, we decided to stop and have a picnic outside the town, even though my gut feeling gave me a warning that something was going to happen. We stopped near another small town. It all happened right next to a forest. There were special benches and a table in the middle of them, and a small place where you could park your car. So we were just eating and chatting with each other when two people appeared literally out of the blue. I guess they came from the forest. They stood right behind our parents' backs, and they were just staring at us for like a minute, a guy and a girl. The guy looked like he was in his late 20s, and the girl looked like she was 17 to 19 years old. They wore totally black clothes. The girl wore a black long dress. By the way, I just realized that it looked kind of like the dress that Morticia Addams wore in the Addams Family. She also had a corset, very long black hair, literally so long it was down to her thighs. He wore something like black pants and a black cloak with weird embroidery. He was tall and had long black hair just like the girl. Now, but I mean, you may think now, maybe they were just some goth teens who took a walk in the forest. But there are extremely weird things about them. They both are very pale. And I don't think they had on any makeup because they came right up to us. I could see veins on their necks and hands. The girl had very long and sharp nails without any nail polish. Her teeth never showed, so I could only slightly see sharp teeth on their upper jaw when they spoke. I didn't like them from the moment I took my first glance at them. I can't explain it. There was just something so scary and intimidating about the way they looked at us. Now, when they started approaching us, I felt frightened. And when I talked to my sister about it, she told me that she felt the same. When they came up to us, they asked if we were tourists. My parents said yes, and then the girl just said, "Oh, be careful here." Then they turned around and went in the direction where they had come from. I was watching them the whole time, but my mom suddenly distracted me, and when I wanted to see them walking away, they had just disappeared. Literally like they were never there. Now, I'm 26, and I still have no freaking idea who they were and where they came from. But when I recall those memories and see them in my head, it's still very frightening. Now, in this next account, a woman and her friends are hitting the night spots in Seattle when she encounters a man who claims that he's a vampire. He seems to know everything about her, which was alarming. So she states, over the holiday period, 3 days before New Year's 2012, my girlfriends and I decided to explore Seattle's nightlife. I have lived in Seattle for the last 5 years, but have not really investigated the city's nightlife, much to my girlfriend's annoyance. My girlfriends were fully aware of this fact, and begrudgingly, I went on the pub crawl. Now, after hours of trudging through the cold night and visiting many bars, we finally discovered a bar in Belltown, which was located down by an alleyway. I don't know the name of the bar. It was dark, and I wasn't attentive at this point. Now, this was our destination, and I was relieved. I was a designated driver, and I had stopped drinking several hours earlier, so I wasn't really feeling the euphoria that was shared by my girlfriends. In fact, I was downright miserable. I remember the entryway to the bar had 2 stone steps. I stubbed my toe on one of them as I ascended the steps, which is why I remember. The interior was dark. It was small, packed full of hunters, and had a very sticky floor. We managed to push our way to the bar and order some drinks. We stood near the bar and the place was heaving. My girlfriends were already consumed the first lot of refreshments, and they were drinking like fish, so it was the best place for us to stand. I pushed my way to the bar a second time to get the girls more drinks. Whilst I was standing at the bar, I was flanked on the right by a group of men who were loud and crass. And to my left was a man probably 6 foot tall or so with dark, short hair and wearing a gray t-shirt. I didn't pay much attention to anyone as my focus was to attract the bartender so I could order the drinks. Now, the man on the left spoke to me, but I couldn't decipher what I heard. I turned to look at his face, and his stare was quite piercing. I noticed he had dark eyes, but then he was backlit, so part of his face was cast in shadow. He then touched my shoulder and said something. At first, I couldn't interpret what he was trying to say. There was too much noise, music blaring, punters talking and laughing. It just sounded like a roar until it touched my shoulder. And the noise just drifted away like when one inserts earplugs to reduce the noise. Now, at first, I couldn't comprehend what happened. I think I was dazed for a minute or so, and then he started to speak again, and I could hear him. He asked for my name, and I provided my real name without thinking. Then he asked who my friends were. The chit-chat carried on for a couple minutes, and then he told me he was a vampire. I scoffed at the statement, and then he showed me his teeth. His teeth were nice, bright and shiny, and he had slightly elongated canines. I didn't believe him. I thought the teeth were glued on, and I thought my girlfriends must have bribed him to poke fun at my skeptical nature. I asked him if he liked to roleplay as a vampire and became quite persistent in questioning. He was adamant that he was an actual vampire and got frustrated, so I asked him to prove it. He said that he could bite me to prove it, but I rejected that idea. I'm not naive to think blood disorders can be passed on through a bite. He mentioned he knew where I was from, which I thought was easy since I had a British accent, where I work, and roughly where I live now. I was astounded when he clearly stated I was from the north of England, northern coast near Blackpool. Actually, I was born in Preston, Lancashire, which is 15 minutes from Blackpool. He stated I worked for an aerospace company and that I lived 40 minutes south of Seattle. He mentioned that I was married. The married part was obvious. I had my wedding rings on. And then he stated that I had a little girl. At this revelation, I was truly nervous. I didn't believe he was a vampire, but a stalker? He knew too much about me. I wondered how he knew I had a little girl. I was panicked at this stage. I quickly walked away and pushed my way back to my friends. I didn't turn around to look at him, and I quickly told my friends what occurred. We left the bar within minutes. We had to walk a little, and as we approached the car park, my friends noticed the vampire from the bar standing next to a bus shelter. I quickly ushered my friends into the car park and got out of Seattle as fast as I could drive, hoping he didn't get a chance to see the license plate number. So after the next couple weeks, I was questioned a multitude of times by my friends and had been asked to inspect every single aspect of that night. The night in question, I was cold stone sober. So I know what I heard and saw. However, I'm still dubious that he was a vampire, but I am not sure what he was. I was astonished that he knew so much about me. I can't explain how he knew so much. I'm essentially a foreigner in this country, and I don't have much information spread everywhere as most U.S. citizens do. It's hard to track me unless you have access to immigration databases. Anyway, this is my weird story. You can interpret this tale any way you wish. I, on the other hand, had learned to be more careful about the places I visit in the future. Now, this next account, a young woman living in Idaho believes that she had an encounter with a real vampire. She claims to have written author Anne Rice about the incident, possibly the same vampire that Rice wrote about. This is what she stated. I'll admit, I wrote to Anne Rice about my account of my encounter with a vampire. I find it interesting that she first wrote Interview with a Vampire in 1973. The book was published in 1976. I didn't read the book until 1980. Upon reading the book, I felt she may have met the same person I met in 1973. I have never received a reply from her. I do realize that she probably gets thousands of emails per month on her website. I wrote to her in 2001. I have told my story several times to several different people and always get the same response, one of disbelief. And although my mother and sisters sometimes still tease me asking, do you remember when you dated the vampire? I'm now 51 years old. 34 years ago, I was 17, and that summer I worked for the U.S. Forest Service as an intern through a government program called Neighborhood Youth Corps. We planted trees and dug potential fire break lines in the forest in northern Idaho. A firefighting crew came into town midsummer since it was a particularly dry summer and it was on standby just in case they were needed. Although that crew was the most beautiful young men I'd ever seen, among that crew was the most beautiful man I had ever seen. He had long blonde hair and perfectly symmetrical features. He reminded me more of the more refined version of Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin. He was tall and handsome, and I ever thought I would give up my virginity to him. I spent a lot of time just looking at him. He apparently noticed and began talking to me when the crew came into town from their forest stations. He asked me out, and I was ecstatic. We met for dinner several times, always late after 10 p.m. He never ate, urging me to order whatever I would like to have, and he'd just have a glass of wine. I never knew how old he was, but the drinking age in Idaho at the time was 19. He also had a European accent of some sort. He said he was from Germany. We would part at the restaurant, and he never made any attempt to kiss me, which I thought was very strange, since every other guy I had dated prior would always be all over me. So one night I suggested we meet at a place very near to my apartment, as I planned to ask him back to my house afterward for whatever. You got it, I wanted him. Fast forward to my apartment. After opening a bottle of wine and chatting, he said he wanted to take me into his confidence because he really liked me. He continued to say that he doesn't usually tell people the truth about him because it scares people. Okay, I felt that first flash of fear. He then went on to tell me that he was from Germany and he was over 400 years old and that he was a vampire. I didn't know what to say, so I asked, "What do you mean, a vampire?" He said he was from an aristocratic family, was chosen and attacked by a vampire in his family's estate. He was made a vampire by his attacker. Because of what he had become, he left with these other vampires and traveled all over the world. He came to hate him so much that he branched out on his own in France after many years. I asked him if he drank blood and killed people. He paused and said that, yes, sometimes he chose to take a human life. Okay, at that point, my fear was turning to terror. He was either a psychopath with an interesting story, he was the real thing, and I was about to die either way. I told him that he scared me. He said he thought he probably would, and that was not his intention. It was hard for him to make friends, and when he felt he could trust someone, he would tell them the truth about himself, since his lifestyle was not ordinary and needed acceptance of what friends he had to maintain a friendship with them. Now, by this time, I was really freaking out and said, "I think you should leave." I remember he looked sad. He said, of course, he would leave, but he wanted me to think about being friends with him. I said, "I don't think so. You need to leave." He got up slowly and picked up his jacket and reached inside his jacket pocket for a pen and paper. I was really shaking by this time, and I thought his every move was a ploy to his move to kill me. But he wrote his phone number at the camp on a piece of paper and said, "If you change your mind, call me." And then he left. Now, when he walked out the door, I was trembling so badly I could barely dial the phone. I called my mother to come get me and to take me home that night. I told her I'd just ended a date with a creepy, scary guy. I paced the floor until she got there, listening for any sounds that might indicate that he was breaking in my apartment. Now, I told my parents, and they said I did the right thing by calling them. My dad said, "It's time for you to move out of that apartment," and I did. I never called the guy, and I never saw him again. Now, his name was Manfred Kirchner. I have never forgotten him. I thought he was a psycho until I read Interview with the Vampire. I have wondered for 28 years now if he was what Anne Rice called a stot. Believe me or not, there you have it. Now, the authorities in Craiova, which is in southwest Romania, opened an investigation against 6 people alleged to have impaled the body of a villager who, according to them, had transformed himself into a vampire and sucked blood from them during the night. Now, the body of Peter Toma had been unearthed 6 weeks later by his brother-in-law in the presence of several of the members of the family, including his widow and her granddaughter. According to several testimonies, they made an incision in the chest of Toma to extract his heart before burning it. One report states that in accordance with the local custom to protect against vampires, they dissolved the ashes in water and drank it. An autopsy carried out by the authorities at Craiova confirmed that the heart was indeed taken. The 6 people explained that after the death of Toma, they had felt weakened, as if they did not have any more blood. One night I saw it in my room, and in the morning I couldn't arise. So much I was weakened, said the granddaughter of Toma. According to her, as soon as the exorcism ritual was performed, the dead body did not come anymore to haunt the family. Now, the newspaper reported that several villagers affirmed that the exorcism ritual was known and practiced for a long time in the area, and that in each time had appeared effective against vampires. Now, for centuries, we have had to protect ourselves against these creatures by finding the graves of the undead and risking our lives by ripping out their hearts, said a 68-year-old local farmer. Now, look, that Toma story is a real story. I've known about that for a long time. It comes in various, variations, but this Peter Toma was supposedly a vampire. So in 1984, 9 people were found dead in various sections of the French Quarter of New Orleans. They all had been murdered by having their throats torn out. The paramedics responded to the scenes, were struck by the fact that there was no blood at the scene. Something or someone had simply sucked all the blood directly from the victims. Police to this day do not have a suspect in this case. The murder spree ended as quickly as it had begun. Rumors suggested that it was the work of a rogue vampire that was destroyed by an elder vampire sect of New Orleans because of pressure placed by authorities on the known vampire community in the city. Now, in 1933, on 2 different nights, police were called to Royal Street, where on each night young prostitutes were found lying in an alley with their throats torn out. Both women had been dead only a few minutes when they were found, but no blood was found at the scene. A local resident who lived above one of the murder scenes claimed a dark figure was observing leaning over one of the victims, and the people began to scream for the police. The witness said the dark figure had climbed over a 12-foot wall at the end of the alley with little effort. It appeared to the witness that the dark figure was a man dressed in a black cape and hat. Police searched but found nothing. and both murders have yet to been solved. Now, here's another historical account. In the spring of 1788, a family set up housekeeping in the small mountain community of Dillsboro, North Carolina. The family name was Alfred, and there were rumors that they had descended from royalty. They bought land by the river and built what was a very nice, large Southern colonial home. Now, Dr. Alford opened an office and pharmacy and a few rooms in the front of the house. The local people were at first happy that a new doctor had arrived in their community, but very quickly this attitude was about to change. Two men who had gone to the new doctor to be treated for gout suddenly died. Both men had been well-liked members of the community, and circumstances angered many of the residents. However, in a short time, the local minister had brokered peace in the community, and everything seemed to be fine. However, this calm was short-lived. That fall, a young daughter of the minister was found dead in her bed with puncture marks on her throat. The minister's wife swore she had seen a dark form hovering over her daughter, and she screamed, but it was too late. The child quickly succumbed to the attack. The incident caused a huge outcry in the town, and the people of the area started to claim a vampire or group of vampires were in their midst. For many nights, groups of people, or groups of men ventured out and searched out, but found nothing. However, some men came to have seen a large black bat-like creature fly over them. A few nights after the sighting, a young boy ran down the hill to his grandfather's house and proclaimed that something was up the hill in his house, attacking his parents. The grandfather summoned other men and they ran to the house, but only found the parents and their two young daughters who were dead with punctured wounds to their necks. The area was immediately alerted. Soldiers were called in and searched the area. By February 1789, the community had quieted down. Then one evening, screams were heard, and when men arrived, they witnessed a black form of a human run from the house, run down the hill and into the Alford house. When the village men came into the house, there were screams that had come from. They found the bodies of a young couple with vicious bite marks on their throats. Almost at once, more men came, and they were told that the murderer had run down the hill into the Alford house. When the search party got to the Alford house, Dr. Alford refused to let them in. However, as soon as the sheriff arrived, they dragged Dr. Alford outside and tied him to a tree. When the men entered the house, they were surprised at what they found. The upstairs bedrooms each had beds, but it was clear that no one had slept in them. When the sheriff and search party went downstairs, they found 3 caskets, and Mrs. Alford, who was dressed in black, lying in one of the caskets and very much alive. She hissed and cursed at them as they pulled her from the casket. Later that night, the sheriff and the village minister announced to the crowd assembled outside the Alford house that the Alfords and their sons were vampires. The Alfords were summarily hanged and then placed back inside the house. The house was then set on fire and burned to the ground. However, the couple's 15-year-old son was not found and was never seen in the area again. There were no further unusual murders in the area. Now, that case was actually on the books. And I had heard about that years ago. So, were they vampires? Who knows? So this next account, the witness states, when my mother was young, living in Tacoma, Washington, a mere few blocks from Puget Sound, 3 houses down from the home Bing Crosby was born in, she said a strange family had moved in. She never saw any activities during the day, but they were always entertaining at night. There seemed to be a pair of couples, and perhaps an additional male or 2 in the household. Mom said they could see elegant interiors, yet unkept exteriors. They never interacted with anyone in the neighborhood. Never. Now, they were all dressed very elegant and old-fashioned, dark Edwardian style. All of them seemed young yet old, and careless, if you will. They quickly gained the reputation of odd, leading folks to whisper vampires. So one night in 1953, when my mom was 9, she remembers being late, hurrying home before dark as she would be in trouble. She wasn't paying attention, and smack, she ran right into a tall, handsome, very pale man with all black eyes wearing an evening cape of black with red lining. He grabbed her, looked at her, set her back, and told her to pass by quickly. She ran home as fast as she could, knowing she had just run into one of them, and it was a lucky break. The next morning, the headlines in the papers reported a young woman found dead in the park not far from her house. She had been drained of blood. The neighborhood vamps left the area shortly thereafterwards. True story. Now, in an encounter with a pale humanoid in New Orleans French Quarter and an unexplained puncture wound may have resulted in the eventual death of one of the witnesses. This is what they wrote to me. I'll try to be brief. I didn't ever want to mention this, but 15 years later, it still haunts me. My now deceased ex had an affinity for New Orleans. I hadn't been back since his death. Not that I didn't share some of his fixation with the city, but I've had too many strange encounters here, and I don't feel safe going back. The night of this encounter, we hadn't been drinking at all. That needs to be clearer with the location. He was a big guy, 6'4", and full of muscle. We were just taking a stroll after the street started to quiet down. I remember everything being a normal walk until after we passed Ursuline Convent, heading back toward the river. I'm normally spot on with direction, but something about New Orleans makes me lose my bearing, and I rely on landmarks. Just after we crossed the street, leaving the corner of the convent behind us, I noticed it became eerily quiet. That's something that happens there, especially as people stumble to their hotels. He also noticed something because he gripped my hand quite hard and picked up the pace. He had a strange look on his face as I struggled to keep up, and he was taking odd routes. Finally, I caught what was making him act bizarre. I followed a split-second glance of his to a building. Now, the best I could say, it looked like a dingy, pale Spider-Man going up the side of the building. I remember him harshly whispering not to look, to just keep moving. He was taking us to Bourbon Street, where there would be hopefully more people. But this was the off-season in the midweek, so there were less people, and even less than what I would have expected. Time seemed to stand eerily still, as if time had stopped except for us and it. I looked about 2 blocks later, and it was on the roof, clearly tracking something that I prayed was not us. The silence was truly deafening as my adrenaline was growing, and I think I tuned out more sounds trying to escape being prey. Now, this thin humanoid, which was defying gravity, freaked us out bad. We made it to the hotel with my last memory of a glide being just before the house where the supposed vampire's brothers lived and disappeared from. I think it was the most harrowing experience I ever had, and there's been a few close calls in my life. I know it's a quirky city with plenty of strangers, but this was like we were in another dimension. To this day, it still frightens me. We were completely sober, and just out for a romantic stroll in a city that we had a connection with. That thing, I can't escape it, even over time. Now, my boyfriend had said little about it. He was even more disturbed by this than I was. He refused to say anything other than corroborating what I saw and what it was going on longer than I knew. It had come from a house away from us when he first noticed it. It's worth noting that before this, we had gone to listen to Johnny Gordon at Lafitte's, drank regular soda, I needed to tie my shoe right across the street and something bit his leg. 2 decent puncture wounds, maybe a half-inch apart on his calf. We brushed it off as maybe bumped into something or that we didn't notice, or then we just took our stroll. They were deep, though, to not notice, but it was, whatever it was, it left strange overtones to us. The city streets took on a weird vibe that night. To be honest, it left a huge spooky shadow over all my memories of the beloved quarter. He's not around for me to ask more, so I'm asking if any of you have encountered anything like this before. Now, the witness later got back to me, referring to the puncture wounds, because I had asked her to go in more detail, and she was a bit reluctant. We were honestly never able to get a concrete diagnosis, and there were extensive tests along with visits to specialists. Now, he was only 37, and it started with fatigue and heart palpitations and edema in his calves to the point of convincing him to go to the doctor. I want to say within 6 to 8 months after this occurrence. He passed just shy of 3 years ago. We used to go out there so often that it became more feasible to have our own place there, as it was every 2 or 3 weeks out there for a long weekend. I think I said, though, this was pretty much our last time there. May have been one other trip to gather our things out of our home. Now, before I get to the questions tonight, I did want to mention something else. And this has to do with the whole legend thing. Now, over the years, there have been a lot of speculation concerning real connections between non-terrestrial reptilian species and vampire beings. And I have written about this. I've gotten some pretty interesting feedback on that as well. But anyway, some feel that this is simply a conspiracy theory, or it used to be an allegory to sell books. But both elements, in my opinion, offer some insight to the hypothesis that may help explain some of the mysteries that why we're here on Earth. Anyway, bear with me. This is where part of the symbolism in the story of Dracula originates. It was written by Irish author Bram Stoker and published in 1897. Stoker knew the vampire legends after years of research. There's no part of the world and no era of history that does not have its myths and legends about vampires who feed off other people's energy and blood. Now, the name is Dracula. The Draco constellation is the alleged home of the royal reptilian bloodlines. He is called Count Dracula, symbolic of the way these Draco bloodlines have been carried by human royalty and aristocracy. Dracula is a vampire, symbolic of the need of the Draco reptilians to drink human blood and feed off human energy. Dracula's shapeshifts appear and disappear, symbolic of the reptilian shapeshifters. He cannot stand direct sunlight, what some say of the reptilians and greys. He comes in through windows, symbolic of the interdimensional portals through which reptilian entities supposedly enter our world. Now, Stoker's character was largely based on a man called Dracula, or Vlad the Impaler in Romania, Vlad Tepes, the 15th century ruler of the country called Wallachia, not far from the Black Sea in what is now Romania. This was the same region that was once called Transylvania, the home of the most famous vampire legends in the Danube River Valley, which runs from Germany to Romania into the Black Sea. Now, Vlad III, or the Prince of Wallachia, slaughtered tens of thousands of people and impaled many of them on stakes. He would sit down to eat amid the forest of dead bodies, dipping his bread in the blood. The records indicate that victims were sometimes impaled so that they hung upside down on the stake. Death by impalement was slow and painful. Victims sometimes endured for hours or days. Dracula had the stakes arranged in various geometric patterns, and the most common was the ring of concentric circles. The height of the spear indicated the rank of the victim, an excellent indication of the ritual-obsessed reptilian mind. The decaying corpses were often left there for months. It was once reported that an invading Turkish army turned back in fright when it encountered thousands of rotting corpses impaled on the banks of the Danube. In 1461, Muhammad II, the conqueror of Constantinople, a man not noted for his squeamishness, was sickened by the sight of 20,000 impaled corpses rotting outside Dracula's capital, Tirgovista. The warrior sultan turned over command of the campaign against Dracula to subordinates and returned to Constantinople. Now, on St. Bartholomew's Day, 1459, Dracula had 30,000 merchants and others impaled in the Transylvanian city of Brasov. One of the most famous woodcuts of the period shows Dracula feasting amongst the forest of stakes and their grisly burdens outside Brasov while the nearby executioner cut apart other victims. Impalement was Dracula's favorite technique, but by no means his only method of inflicting unimaginable horror. The list of tortures employed by this deeply sick man included nails in heads, cutting off limbs, blinding, strangulation, burning, cutting off noses and ears, scalping, skinning, exposure to wild animals, and boiling alive. No one was immune to Dracula's attention. His victims included women and children, peasants and great lords, ambassadors from foreign powers, and merchants. Now, Vlad III was the son of Vlad Dracul, who was initiated into the ancient order of the dragon by the Holy Roman Emperor in 1431. Its emblem was a dragon, wings extended, hanging on a cross. Vlad II wore this emblem, and his coinage bore the dragon symbol. All the members of the order had a dragon on their coat of arms, and was nicknamed Dracul, the devil or the dragon. Son Vlad signed his name Dracula, or the devil's son, and this later became Dracula, a name that translates as something like son of him who had the order of the dragon. This is the same dragon order that is today promoted by the British Holy Grail author Sir Lawrence Gardner. By the way, Queen Mary, or Mary of Teck, the mother of King George the Sixth, and therefore grandmother to Elizabeth II, was descended from the sister of Dracula. So I figured I'd put that little tidbit in there. So anyway, I want to thank CS for the $3 super sticker. It's much appreciated. So people got any... Yes, so King Charles is traced back to Dracula. The royal family definitely is. Pelican X vibe, marked ones. What are the signs that you are indeed a marked one for vampires? You know, I'm not into the whole vampire culture. I really don't know, be honest with you. Do I believe in vampires? Energy vampires? Possibly. Blood drinking vampires? Who knows? And they make good stories. I love the vampire movies. I was kind of raised in the horror genre because my dad loved the Wolfman movies. And as I told you people many times, I was named after Lon Chaney Jr. So there you go. So I saw a lot of horror movies when I was a kid and heard about horror stuff. Christine Lehner asked, "You have to invite them in." I don't know. I don't know if that's really true or not. You know, the whole vampire legend kind of overlaps with other legends as well. I really don't know what to think about that. Let's see what we got. Lon is low key as a vamp. That's interesting. Any questions, folks? Anything you want to state? Jose Sanchez. Are vampires real, or is it more legend and myth mixed in with some historical personalities like Vlad the Impaler and other truths? Exactly. I think it's mostly a myth. The whole reptilian thing that I talked about, I've been hearing that for years and years and years, and I wrote about it. I actually did some investigation into some of that. I've talked to a few people, mostly lorists, about that who are familiar with the whole legend. They seem to think that there is a connection somehow. But as far as beyond that, I really don't know. I just thought it'd be fun to talk about vampires tonight. It is interesting because I have a lot of friends. I have quite a few friends that live in Romania, and many of them live up in the old Transylvania area, up in northwest Romania. Many of them are of Roma background, so they're gypsy. They know the whole legend. I mean, it goes beyond Dracula. It goes back a lot of generations for a lot of different things. Jose Sanchez, judging from Vlad's history, he may have been a psychopath. Yeah, well, I have no doubt he probably was. Savage Grammy, what's the difference between a lawyer and a vampire? The vampire only sucks blood at night. Oh, that's very good. Soulite use sex pat. Have you gotten any case stories from South Korea since I'm here? There is a YouTube video of the Korean War vet that saw a Bigfoot in Seoul during the war. Well, if you have it, would you send it to me? I would really like to read that. I tell you, the Korean War was very interesting as far as unexplained activity. There was a lot of UFO activity and possible extraterrestrial activity during the Korean War. As far as other phenomena, I don't know. But no, if you do have that story, please send me the link. I would love to read it. I don't get enough from the East, and stories from Japan, South Korea, and Indochina, and other areas. I definitely would be interested in looking at. And welcome to Scott Harper. He's a new member. He's also on my team. So thanks, Scott. Glad you're here. Any other questions, folks? Well, look, this Tuesday night, I've got Beck Lawrence coming in. We're going to be doing a live show Tuesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern time. Beck is a proprietor of a tarot shop. She is a witch, but she's been facing some issues with the borough, the town here in Hanover, where I was born and raised. Very conservative town. And they're threatening her with basically fining her for giving tarot readings. And she's filed a lawsuit. So we will talk about that. And she will be coming on live, and we will be talking about that. So, yeah, Tuesday night should be an interesting show. Next Friday night, I'm debating what I want to cover. Time travel, time slips, that type of thing, possibly. Depends what I can find in my archives. But again, I want to thank each and every one of you for watching and chatting. If you donated, it's truly appreciated. Your support's what makes all this possible. Please like, subscribe, and share. If you have a sighting and you want to be considered for the show or on the blog, just email me at Lon Strickler at phantomsandmonsters.com. So until we meet again, I want to thank you all again for coming on here. And you take care and you have a good night. Be safe. And I will see you next Tuesday night and or Friday night. Good night.